What's going on, collective listeners? We got a special guest today, just simply from the promotional aspect of Sprintember, Mike Tucker from Villanova. He's director of football strength and conditioning down there at Villanova. He actually joined us today, and we just discussed, it wasn't, the whole thing isn't about Sprintember, but it is something that I wanted to make sure we push. I think it's a really good concept, and I think it's something that really brings the community together as far as the strength and conditioning community. So awesome stuff. He sheds a lot of light on everything that he's doing at Villanova, a lot of his experiences, just overall his philosophies on pretty much everything that we discuss when it comes to a lot of the topics that are covered on this podcast, whether it be sport preparation, whether it be transfer to sport, whether it be, your philosophies and your pillars when it comes to how you implement and uphold the standard for your program, and a bunch of other things. He's just a good dude to talk to. So I really appreciate him hopping on. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this episode. So let's get it going. What's going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Samson Strength Coach Collective podcast. Super pumped to have you all here. Appreciate you listening in as always. I'm your host, Anthony Grasso, and today we are joined by Mike Tucker, who's the director of football strength and conditioning at Villanova University. So Mike, welcome. Obviously, as we were just talking about, super pumped to get you on here. I know it's been a little bit. You're super busy. There's a lot going on, and you made time for this. I really appreciate that, even though with the parents in town and everything. So obviously you're a legend, bro. I appreciate it. But yeah, we're going to get into it. But first, if you want to kind of introduce yourself and just let the people know, a little bit about Mike.
Yeah, Coach, appreciate you having me on. I know it's been a while since we talked, but I definitely think you're putting out a great product here. So I'm, super appreciative to, link up with you right now. But a little bit about me. I mean, I'm from outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I played college football at Holy Cross under Jeff Oliver, who's the head strength coach there. Had a really great relationship with him. He's an elite human, and I dedicate a lot to that man. And I ended up, interning for him for a couple of years while I was playing, and then right after. Then I bounced around a number of different schools, North Dakota State, Clemson, San Jose, working with a lot of different teams. Then, 4.5 years ago now, I landed the job at Villanova, fortunate enough, 20 minutes from my hometown. And, it's been an absolute pleasure to, grow in this role and just kind of, be able to now be in a position that, I'm still able to go into work and learn every day, still able to, listen to podcasts like your own and hear, and all these different new coaches are coming up with new ideas, and it's great for the industry, I think, as a whole. So that's a little bit about me, man. I don't want to talk too long.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I had no idea you played football at Holy Cross. I went, and obviously I met Jeff when I was a intern at Quinnipiac over here with B over here in Connecticut. And he took me up there, and I remember I met Jeff, and it was crazy because I was just like this lowly intern, and he's like this dude who's like been in the game for so long. And he like pulled me aside and was asking me a bunch of questions. And I'm like, why are you asking me stuff? You know what I mean? I'm like, but that's like, that was like him, and like everybody he surrounded himself with. He's just like that guy. Like he's just more concerned with what everybody else does. He just wants to listen, which I thought was wild.
Yeah, he's a legend. And like, it's one of those trees, like everybody knows Springfield is like, has this big tree. Like you got a lot of dudes coming out of Holy Cross, and like Patel's one of them, right? Patel was there. So many guys who have been in and around that program. And it's just a lot of what he does is a genuine person that, I think he does a great job. So
yeah. What years did you play there?
10 to 14.
Oh, okay. All right.
And like Mike Morgan, who was down with Donnell Boucher at the Citadel for like 6-7 years. We interned together. Zabicki, who's now at Rhode Island, we interned together. And like I'm sure I'm missing a ton of people who, when I played, they were interning while I was there. So
yeah,
it's a small world, man.
Yeah, for sure. And how many years have you been at Villanova now?
This would be my fifth season. Yeah, so
interesting. Yeah. And everything's going pretty well. Obviously, it seems like you're starting to get to a point. Like, obviously, I came across you because of Sprintember, which we'll get into in a little bit. But Villanova, kind of like take us through like start to like where things are at now. Like, are things kind of now in the direction of where you wanted it and what you envisioned for the program when you first showed up there?
Yeah, I think early on in my career, I was at Kutztown for 2 years, Clemson for 6 months, San Jose for 2 years, North Dakota for less than 6 months.
Yeah,
and a lot of young do it, right? And they're hopping from intern GA, first full-time spot. And then, when you get to a spot where it's like, okay, you have solidified it now that, looking back on it, you have some time to reflect. It's like, have you accomplished what you wanted to accomplish year one? Have you accomplished what you wanted to accomplish year two? And the players turn over, but from a culture and standard standpoint, I think that's always present, and it's very fluid, right? If you stop upholding a certain standard or start accepting or tolerating certain habits or behavior, then it's going to, go down or go up based on your expectations and how you're upholding the standard. now that I'm looking back on it, I do think, people say, oh, I wouldn't change anything. Like I would definitely change a lot of things. Right. But I do like the direction we're in. We were able to secure a conference championship last year, top 8 finish, beat JMU, which is all great accomplishments. But now it's, the next year, what are you going to do this year? So, younger team this year, hungry team, but always looking to improve on my end. So then they're able to improve on their end.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you have an idea that you might end up at a place like Villanova, or did you kind of have a different vision for yourself when you first set out in the industry itself?
I wish I'd played at a place like Villanova. But it's funny when I interviewed the head football coach, Mark Ferrante, he's been here 30 years. So, I introduced myself. Hey, Mike Tucker. He's like, I remember you. Because went to camp there. I wanted to get recruited there. And I was like, yeah, you never offered me. So, we always joke about that. But, I do think the people end up logo chasing, but I do think that being at a place that you can call home is important. So I think, the longevity, quote unquote longevity, I've been here 5 years, right?
That's a long time for a lot of places, right?
that's pretty telling about our industry, unfortunately.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it is nice to be at a place, closer to family, at a very competitive league, very competitive level, able to, hopefully provide a half decent product to our team. So that's pretty much my point of emphasis right now, I guess. Right.
Yeah, for sure. And when it came to kind of these like standards that you were like, all right, I got to set these out pretty early on, obviously getting into Villanova and whatnot, and these kind of like pillars, I guess you could say. I think everyone talks about like philosophies and stuff like that. And like you said, sometimes they change, sometimes they don't, or whatever it is, but they always need to be present. What were and what are some of those for you, right? If they have changed at all for you and your program?
Yeah, the 3 things we really focus on are having a great attitude, and that's, being positive, being infectious, right? Giving maximum effort all the time and paying attention to detail. Those are the 3 things. They're all super controllable, right? It's not, oh, you have to squat X number, you have to do this, to do that. If you do those 3 things, man, we're going to get along.
Yeah.
You don't have to like, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Like, you don't have to do that. Like, you can be very disrespectful and call someone sir. Like, you can be very respectful and not say that. So,
right.
It comes down to a foundation of trust, really, and rapport. And that starts the day the kids step on campus, trying to get to know them, trying to be at the meals with them, trying to talk to them as people, let them know you have their best interest throughout the recruiting process. Even something as small as social media now, like you have such instant access to guys and they have instant access to you. You can kind of see deeper into each other's lives. So, when I'm posting something, they're commenting on it, and it's, but building that rapport, that trust, and that foundational relationship really enhances all the secondary things of building the culture, setting the standard, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And when you talk about, whole like yes or no sort of thing, and I think there is an element of, I don't want to say like military, right? Because I think that's the biggest issue when it comes to football is like the constant, like, oh, we should be more like the military. We should do things like the military, whatever the case would be. I think there's some good and bad. And obviously like there's some philosophical concepts, but the reality is like, I think when it comes to the sport of football, you're dealing with a different element. You're dealing with a different type of task, right? So when it comes to that and the whole like yes sir, no sir thing or whatever, how do you kind of, because like to me, it's like, I'm listening to you talk and I'm kind of like, all right, I could kind of see like what the environment might look like in Mike Tucker's room, right? Like I could kind of see or feel what it might look like, kind of like jumps off like in an interview, right? You always feel like, okay, I kind of know what this guy's saying, even though it's just on paper and he's speaking it to me. I kind of get it, right? Is that kind of how you approach some of the training and some of the ways you connect with the athletes? Like, hey, we're going to have standards, but at the same time, it's like, you're going to see me as a human and there's going to be a little bit more of like, I'm going to allow everyone to kind of like go about expressing themselves and approaching the training session and approaching like the training cycle and the training process in their own way, as long as it kind of falls under the umbrella of those standards you set out for them.
Yeah, I think laying it out like black and white is really important. But again, it's the standards that we kind of agreed on, right? It's not me coming and saying, we're going to be about X, Y, and Z. Hey, what do you guys want to be about? All right. What do you care about? You care about winning championships. Okay. What's important in winning a championship? Okay. Let's line out those things. Okay. Well, do you want to be held to an above average standard, a high standard, an elite standard? What is it? Because when you tell me you have the case of the Mondays, like we're going to have problems then. See, again, if you want to be 5 and 6, that's great. You just may not fit in here, right? Because previous classes have built this foundation and standard, right? I think it comes from the players initially, and then it obviously ebbs and flows with the maturity of your team. If you have a mature team, you can't give them as much autonomy, unfortunately, right? Just reality. You come in with 90 freshmen, like a lot of autonomy, you're going to go nowhere. Last year with COVID, we had 11 sixth years, right? Like there was the most autonomy I've ever given a team, because we were older dudes. We had a lot of experience, and we weren't the most disciplined team in workouts, like point blank. We had way more disciplined teams in previous years. I had way more disciplined teams in other years, and, but we didn't win any games, because it's about experience and good athletes and good players and us developing those physical qualities. Like you said, the discipline element is a component, but if we were 5% more disciplined, does that mean we are going to be, national champs? I don't believe so.
Yeah.
When you get to a certain point, I think it's, like you said, it's a foundational structural pillar, but ultimately it comes down to the players.
Sure.
But, like you said, treating them like a human, you lay out these standards in black and white, and it's like, hey man, this is what you said you were going to do. You're currently not doing it. Here's now my response to that.
Sure. Yeah.
It's all based on, and then it's like, yeah, I get that. Like, it's all on you, bro. Like, my career's over.
Yeah. Yeah. And so do you think that, because now you kind of bring me to the point where I'm thinking about the whole, how you do one thing is how you do everything, right? And everybody there's always these phrases that go around, and it's always tough when you get a phrase that kind of circulates, right? You're always like, man, that sounds so good. And then you're like, but if it's something that can really apply across the board to almost everyone, or it is being applied in that sense, there's that. It always struck me as there's got to be something up with it though. There's got to be some holes you can poke in it, right? Because nothing is that universally true, right? So I think it's I always look at it like the lines in Vegas, right? When they see the majority of people heading in one direction, obviously they're going to adjust the line in the opposite direction. So does that how do you kind of view that, right? The whole how you do one thing is how you do everything, because we just discussed, right? It's well, I could be as disciplined as I want to be. If I'm not good at football and I don't pay attention to the details of the tactical scheme, you know what I mean? Where are we going to go? What are we going to do?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, like everywhere, some coaches will harp that and preach that, and some coaches will say, no, it's entirely not true. I mean, look, I think you can look around and you can find clues for both. You can find guys we had a guy who led the country in tackles last year, who literally did every single thing right in the entire book and made me feel like a terrible person every time I was around him. Elite human, the hardest worker I've ever been around, led the country in tackles, All-American, and now he's in the NFL. I've worked with other guys in the NFL that were late to meetings consistently, were, disrespectful, talk back. So you see elements of both, and it's oh, well, maybe those guys didn't last. Some of the best athletes in the history, just weren't great people, or didn't, or were late to meetings all the time, or, didn't lift. They just walked in there. I heard a story from one of my buddies, an NFL strength coach. Guy walks in, first round draft pick, and it's year 5. And he's just walks in the door. He's just find me, and just walk. It was consistent back and forth. He's missing weights. He's not, he's missing weigh-ins. He's not doing things right in the weight room. And he just walks in. He's I'm not even going to put up a fight today. Just find me, and just walks out.
Yeah.
Find clues for both. I think it's a catchy saying, no doubt though.
Yeah. I think it kind of catches a lot of people's eye. It sounds really good, right? Because like you said, anything that you can take, overarching, right, and kind of sum it up in one nice, quick, neat, and, clean sentence or whatever, everybody wants to latch on to that. And, and kind of going back to what you talked about social media, right? Obviously we live in a completely different time, right? You and I didn't grow up on the internet. Well, how old are you? You're 30? 30. Yeah, I'm 31. So it's I didn't grow up on the internet. At least I didn't grow up with a smartphone, to a certain extent, right? Whereas a lot of the individuals that we're dealing with now, they, see information, right? And they have the ability to kind of just everything is quick. Everything, the answers come quick, right? Whether the right or the wrong answer, regardless, right? They do come quick, right? And do you find that there's been a way in sort of which that you had to change your coaching style in order to meet or explain some of these standards when it comes to hey, listen, part of what we do takes a little bit of time. There's a process to everything that we do. This isn't going to be the same as when you want to Google search how to do a single leg squat, right? Is it kind of in that sense where you have to kind of change the way that you communicate certain things?
I think, every year is different, from a coach's perspective and an athlete perspective. I do believe that the kids now, the athletes now just want to know why. So when you're telling them why we're doing, I think way back when, and they're way smarter than I was an athlete, or I'm man, what, you guys are so much smarter now. They just know a lot more information. Like you said, it's the ease of access, right? Before, when you were in an argument, people would just argue, but then now it's well, let's ask Google. And then you just win the argument one way or the other.
Yeah.
But they're so much smarter now, and they're so much more in tune with everything. And now unfortunately, in my opinion, they have access to social media and all the experts on there, which I'm sure they're all way smarter and better at their, but well, I saw this on Instagram or I saw this on TikTok. And it's like, all right, well, now we have to do some debunking of myths and then rebuilding back up of some other stuff. So explaining why we're doing what we're doing is always the goal. I think it helps create buy-in, number of different ways to create buy-in. One's competition, right? But I think always just educating them, hey, we're doing X, Y, Z because we want to improve A, B, and C qualities, right? And that's going to lead into our next phase of enhancing those qualities even further, because the game, and then just, you can go into every rabbit hole, and some guys tune you out and some guys are like dialed in listening. So explaining why to today's athlete is really important.
Yeah. The dudes who are dialed in listening are the guys who become strength coaches, right? That's usually
the dummies,
like myself. Yeah. Well, speaking of education, right? You kind of just touched on that a little bit. I do want to get into Sprintember, right? Because that was a major part of why I wanted to get you on the podcast. And I always want to talk about kind of, like I said, I did it with one of my buddies back when I was at UConn, and I was like, oh, this is super fun. Like, this is totally different. I don't think anybody's done something like this before. Maybe they have, I just wasn't aware of it. But just to give you an opportunity, I guess we kind of like, go piece by piece, but number one, like start off, like, where did you come up with this idea and like why, right? Like where did this whole thing come from?
COVID and boredom. Sitting in my house without training any athletes. I was like, dude, what is going on? And just looking for ways. You can only do so much continuing education, man. Like, I don't care who you are, 4 or 5 hours a day, training somebody on the side. Like, we needed something I needed something more to do. So starting it up, like, that's been one of the rabbit holes I've been down for the last, 10 years, is speed development, power development, expression of power, and transfers to speed and on the field. I think when did I start? 2 years ago? I think when I started 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, it was just an idea. And I got some shirts made, and I was like, oh, maybe a couple of my buddies and my mom will buy a shirt. And then it was like over 2,000 coaches downloaded the program. And I was like, holy shit, like, whoa, like that totally unseen. Like, I had no idea that was coming. And it was just like, whoa, like, whether people liked it or didn't like it, it was a free speed program. And that's kind of the goal, is to try and educate people on something I'm passionate about and something that I care about, and something I think that is crucial to sports performance. So that's, and just spread some positivity and provide a free speed program. That's essentially the only thing that I wanted to do. I think that there's, strength and conditioning, we tend to focus on the strength side of that, realm. But I think giving speed and other things a little more light and a little more attention is a positive for the industry overall.
Yeah, for sure. Did you have any idea that it would become this popular? Right? So I knew mom was going to buy a shirt, right? Like, mom will always buy a shirt.
Mom bought a shirt. No
mom's going to support. But because I think like I came across it when I think it either came across it myself, and this is the sort of the caveat about social media is I'm like, there's sometimes like I'll come across it and I'm like, you know what? I don't know if I would have come across that information if I didn't have my Instagram. And that's kind of what keeps me from deleting it. I want to delete it every day. Like every day I'm like, I need to get rid of this thing. But then I'll come across it and I'm like, man, that's some pretty valuable information. And it won't be anything like crazy. It'll be something that kind of fits the dynamic of the way I like to obtain information, which will be like, hey, this guy really put it out there. He really, broke it down or whatever. It was methodical or whatever the case would be. I came across one of your videos. I don't think it had anything to do with Sprintember. It was something about something else, or just some sort of educational piece on sprint work. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I kind of like, slide in the back of my head. I'm like, okay, I know the name, right? And then when my buddy Drew was like, hey, we should do Sprintember or whatever, I was like, oh, that's okay. I know, you know what I mean? So is that kind of like part of it too? Is you feel like you're able to have somewhat of a social media presence in order to kind of create some of the following that you were able to create from and the buzz around Sprintember?
The social media, I'm terrible with social media. I like you, I want to delete it every day. And like Alex Tatara posts something, you're like, God damn, that's good stuff.
Yeah.
And you can read all the books you want, but like it's instant knowledge. And it's coming to you like right from your phone, but it's you have to use it accordingly. Like, it could be a weapon or it could be poison. Yeah. So you have to use it accordingly. And I think being very poignant about who you're following and why you're following them, and not falling into a scrolling habit. Some people post a lot of content just to post a lot of content. Like you said, I want it to be methodical, I want it to be valuable, I want it to be a lot of takeaways. I don't think I have a strong social media presence at all, or social media follow. Sprintember, I was like, oh, let me just put something out and see what happens. That was essentially what it was like. And I think I just wanted to shine a light on something that I didn't see a lot of in sports performance. And maybe that's me not talking to the right people, but I try to think I talk to a lot of coaches and try to learn and grow as much as I can within the industry. And a lot of people are talking about strength and lifting. And it's like, okay, but there's more elements, we have 8 hours to develop these guys. And if 6 or 7 of them are lifting, like, I think we're missing the boat. So, I just want to put something positive in the world, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, so, kind of going back to that, they're like, at what point did you kind of think like, all right, this is kind of the route that I want to go when it came to like sprint work, right? Like, obviously there's a certain like turning point where I think most strength coaches have this journey where they're like, yeah, man, like weights and like all this other stuff. And then like, ways to be specific with weights. And then it's like, oh wait, there's like all this like sprint, jump, throw stuff and like things that actually translate to like, supporting things like on-field performance and whatnot. And then, it's usually around like your late 20s, you get to that point. So like, where was that transition for you, and kind of who can you attribute with like opening your eyes to such a thing?
Yeah, I think it was I definitely know it was at San Jose State, Rockstar staff. It was Mike Nicolini, who's now the director at the New York Jets, Greg Seagrove, who's now an assistant on the 49ers, Gary Uribe, who was at USC, UCLA, Auburn, Sam Tomlins, who was in, Brigadier. Now he's training, government. What is it? The guys who jump out of planes. What are those people called?
What is that? Is that Air Force?
Air Rescue.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So he's trained and like just learning a lot from those guys. And, we were all reading James Smith, Charlie Francis, and it was like, whoa, like and it's like you feel like the cone being like taken off your head. You're like, what? Personally, I've read all those books like more than twice. And it's like, and I don't attribute that as like, that's not pounding my chest. It's like, yeah, I needed that because it was like, what did I just read? It's like applied sprint training, governing dynamics of coaching. Key concepts of speed training and development. It's like you read all those books and like you get to the back, you're like, what did I just read? You could go back on the shelf, or you can swallow your ego and just be like, shit, I need to read it again because I clearly did not understand it well enough.
Yeah.
And then just seeing the results and applying it. I think, and again, all models are flawed to an extent, but it's a model that I think holds a lot of value, and it's developed over the years. And the speed and power training at the forefront, especially for the skill athlete in American college football, is extremely important.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're going to tell me that you read the GDC twice here on my podcast. Is that what you're going to tell me? You read twice? That's really impressive, actually.
Not the first 70, the philosophical portion. I did not read that.
Okay.
That was thick though. That was thick. But then like once you get through the first 70, it's like, boom, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Applied sprint training was twice. The Charlie Francis stuff's twice. And it's just like, okay, but why? And people are, and I see this kind of flawed thinking in intern development too, which is something I think is really important because you're giving back to the future of the industry. And people are like, oh, I did this at blank university, I'm going to do it here. It's like, but that was Rutgers swimming, and this is Harvard tennis. Like, why? Those are two totally different teams. Like Rutgers wrestling in the winter should be a different program than Harvard tennis in the summer. Like different teams too. So I think the why and the principled thinking, everybody's focused on the methods. Like, oh, I did this to increase my bench. I did this to increase my speed, whatever it is. But the principled understanding and approach is something that I think is really important, because then you can leave University of Wisconsin and take that principled thinking and everything you learn. Sure, some of those methods can carry over to Georgia Tech or Georgia or wherever, to whatever sport you're doing, but the principles are what matters. The methods can transfer, sure, but it has to fall into that umbrella principle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and that's the thing I love so much about, the governing dynamics is like, I tried to make it part of our internship curriculum for our sports science interns and for our strength and conditioning interns when I was at UConn. And, it's, I understand it's a heavy book and all that stuff, but I mean, I think it would, obviously at some point it becomes a reference. Like you said, you got through it twice and you're going to continue going back to it. You never stop going back to it. Right. But I think at the end of the book, when James talks about like, hundreds and hundreds of years down the road, when we're no longer, around, people are going to look back and they're going to be like the hope is that someone just looks back and they're like, hey, those guys were all idiots, but there's this one guy like Mike Tucker, and he was like the least of the idiots, right? Like it looked like he was doing something that made like some sense, and that was when it like hit me, and I was like, oh wow, like we really are like that far into, or that like shallow into the intimacy or the infancy of this whole stage of sport preparation and being a professional coach, and just like having like the sport coach and the strength and conditioning coach as a profession itself. But I know, and RIP to the conclave. I know people hear me say it all the time, but that was an incredible resource. And, I wish that James would come back and kick global sports concepts back up again. But and to that point though, it's like, he got to a point where he was just like, I'm tired of pushing against a locked door. Like, I don't think that this is something that like was piquing his interest as much. So like, And then what I did was that, for a while, like when it happened, I was kind of like, damn, you know what? Like, I'm kind of feeling the same way. Like, this is a bad place to be. It's not a good place. And then it kind of moved into what you're describing now, where it's like, you're taking the models, you're taking the information, and then you're able to then apply them in your own direction and apply them in your own way to the sports that you work with. So is that kind of how you feel when you read something? Because a lot of people could read that and be like, man, this is kind of daunting, and I feel depressed almost. You know what I mean? Like, this is, he's calling for the end of strength and conditioning, right? And he's like, well, dang, I just got started. You know what I mean? Like, we just got started. So yeah, what's your take on like how you were able to kind of like take some of that information and then apply it to the teams that you were working with wherever you were at the time?
Every time I read something, I feel like more and more of an idiot. I think I know something, and I turn the page and I'm like, nope, I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So it's really just trying to reassess my program year in and year out. Okay, what worked, what didn't work, how were we, and then some people will be like, oh, well, we won the conference. Well, is that because of or despite my training? My training literally hindered us to that point in time. And, that's where all the research, all the, knowledge searching and all the trying to understand and figure all this out comes into play. And it's like, okay, what did we do well? Did it enhance? Why? And how are we going to adjust for next year? So we're looking to adapt to the newer athletes coming in. What's our team look like? The coaching staff, all that is really important. And then understanding what we did previous years may not work this year. Different team, different limitations, different issues, different schemes potentially. So we're always trying to develop and enhance our product as professionals. And there's a lot of guys doing a ton of really good stuff across the collegiate and NFL landscape that, I try and pull from daily or weekly, either it's call, text, social media sometimes, but a lot of guys are doing a lot of good things. And it's good to see.
Yeah. And so not to, I'm just kind of curious. Did you find that like James' stuff, when it comes to like the actual technical models that he put together, that you had, was there a point in time where you were like, I might have trouble communicating this to a sport coach, or I might have trouble, like the whole like global training load management? Like, I think the model at first, when you read the book, at least for the first time, when I got through like applied sprint training, then he came out with the GDC, and I'm like, oh, this is gold, right? Like, this is what I wanted to do on my Friday and Saturday nights, right? And then you get to a point where like, okay, like, how am I going to make this work? Like, how do we kind of like, right? And then you get creative for sure, right? But then did you kind of come across a little bit of that barrier where like, how am I going to get this done? Like, how can we possibly, get this thing across some of the sport coaches? And then did you end up finding a better model that you've gone with since kind of coming across that information?
Well, I'm sure you, as well as, everybody listening, has found out that all sport coaches don't need us to help them with training loads or practice periodization or planning or anything like that. So you go with heart full of high hopes and you're like, this is what we got to do. And he's like, okay, all right, sounds good. See you later. Get out. Yeah. So it's back and forth, and it's agreements, it's battles, and trying to understand. And look, we're on the same team. We all want to win, right? Like, hey, coach, I think this is going to help, and here are the 3 reasons how. Okay. And then laying out, and then they could say, well, this is what we did last year and we won the championship. And it's man, like, but it's all really well laid out in the book. Do I think the implementation is that crisp? Absolutely not. There's a lot more relationship dynamics and the trust and rapport that we've talked about in the past. And a lot of people can use data to help them, like the catapults of the world, to help them with the research back knowledge and say, hey, coach, we needed to have a load day tomorrow because, it's our 4th day in a row in camp and the guys are fatigued and we saw a spike in workload and, go on and on and on. And the coach can still say, but we're setting the culture. So we're always just trying to assist them in their process. But when the guys pull up with 3 soft tissues the next day, and it's like, well, I told you so, dude. Like, I don't, like you kind of look at them with that, I told you so look, you can't really say it. Yeah, it comes back to that trust, rapport, foundational. And then it comes back to people, right? Like, they have to trust that you know what you're doing and you have the team's best interest at heart, and, your solutions that you're bringing to the table. It's our job as professionals to effectively communicate those solutions. Guys get frustrated and they come back, oh, my coach is an idiot. Well, like, how did you explain it to him? Well, I told him, high, low, CNS, motor. It's like, dude, you're speaking gibberish, man.
Yeah.
Like, they're drawing X and O's on a whiteboard. You're speaking gibberish to them, man. Like, being able to, I was a football coach for 2 years. I think that helps a lot. Kind of, you coach like the rapport aspect, but also like the language and understanding, I think is invaluable for that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if James listened to this podcast, he'd be like, well, Because like his whole thing was, and this is what I liked so much about the book, and I don't know if you felt this way, but like when I got through the book, I didn't feel like I had the answers though. Like, and that was what that, like a lot of books will tell you, like, hey, I'm providing you with some sort of answer or some sort of like content, right? Like this is what we're giving you. We're giving you this method. And you're going to go out and you're going to execute it, right? Where I was like, it's a really technical model, but it's not like, hey, you're going to do this exercise or like this, you know what I mean? It's not, and that's what a lot of people look for. Whereas like when I got through it, I was kind of like, oh, okay, so like I have a really robust framework here, right? But like he would say, and what he said all the time in the conclave was like, I'm just a theorist. I'm giving you guys ideas, but you have to go figure out whether they work or not. And, obviously he would argue that, he put it up against some sort of resistance and, trial and error and all that kind of stuff. But I think that's where we come in. It's just like, all right, well, here's the way that I can go about doing it. And maybe, personally, like I kind of ventured off into like, Game Changer and like the process, a lot of the stuff like Cam Joss is doing. And in my mind, like a couple pages through, I'm like, dang, this is like a sport coach could read this book. Like, and I would have, like, I remember having like a couple, like, I think it was our offensive quality control read it. There's a kid who wants to be a football coach. And I was like, hey man, you want football coach? Just take a look at this book. Right. So like, I guess that was kind of the second part of my question is like, have you come across some like things that you're like, all right, this is a little bit more applicable. It's a little more coach speak. It kind of like, it's a little more friendly, user friendly, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I mean the game changer, Cam Joss, like they're setting the tone, right? Cam Joss is awesome. I think
it's really good. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like we're all trying to attribute and build up to that standard that James is laying out. But like you read that book and you almost have less answers. You're like, oh shit, now there's these 10 factors that unbeknownst to me, now I have to think about. Yeah. Like the more you read and the more you unpack, you're trying to figure out all these different things. And it's like, oh my God, like when you're 23 or 22 and you're just getting into it and it's like, oh yeah, 5 through on, I'm gonna get their bench stronger, man. Let's go. And then like, that's all that matters. And then like, now I know so little and I'm like, just thinking and searching for all the answers. And it's brutal. I'm lucky that, I work with a lot of smart individuals at Villanova that, I can lean on for support, but it's tough. The more you read and research and the longer you're in the field, the less you feel like,
Yeah, exactly. And at first I was like, is it a good thing that I feel bad about myself? Or I was like, anytime I'd make a decision, I'd be like, okay, like you just kind of like have this dude's voice in the back of your head, be like, that would not work in this situation or something like that. Right. And you're like, dang, like I feel bad about myself, like all the time, like almost like second guess. You feel like someone's like watching you, like, you're putting some program together and like, it's almost like someone's leaning over your shoulder, looking at your Excel sheet kind of thing. It's like, no, that volume would not make sense in this situation. Right. But I think it's good though. It's a little bit of a checks and balance. Like it keeps you humble. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just like anything else, right? Like what we do is super complicated and there's a lot going on. And we all would like to think that we're doing right by our athletes. And I think ultimately at the end of the day, like if you really genuinely feel like you're trying to put forth your best effort, then obviously that's, it's a noble endeavor, right? But at the same time, like I wanted it to be more than that because I want to feel like, no, I was, like I said, when people look back and be like, hey, this guy actually was doing something that made sense. Yeah, his effort and his intent was high. He cared, but he was actually trying to do something that made sense as well. So I think there's a good balance between the two, right? I think there's a little bit of the just, oh yeah, if you're a good dude, we want you around. It's like, I think that's good. Like it's important to be a good human being, obviously, first and foremost, no doubt. But like how far, is that going to get you when it comes to like, you got to be good at shit at some point. You know what I mean? Like, you got to get shit done. No.
Yeah. I mean, one of the most rewarding things, an athlete coming to me with a problem and I can somehow figure out what the issue is. Right.
Yeah. It feels incredible.
And, yeah. And then like, you're able to help them and they look at you, they're like, what the hell did you just do? Or like, how did that happen? And it's really rewarding to help people in that fashion. I guess that's why, hopefully most of us got in is to help athletes, not to just hang out and wear t-shirts and shorts even though that is a huge part of the job.
Pretty sweet.
Yeah. But, to your point, understanding and realizing that all this is for the athlete, I think is extremely important.
Yeah. And I think, kind of with that, and a lot of this is guesswork, no doubt, right? Like we are like all like, I think it was one of my first mentors is like, honestly, he's like one of the most brilliant dudes I've ever met. And he was just like, I don't know, man, we're all just guessing out here anyway. You know what I mean? It's like, we're just hoping things work, So
it's what you think, like 70%, and then you're like, guessing on 20, and then 10 is like, just complete guess. Like you like to think, X, Y, and then like you read something or come across, you're like, dude, that ain't true.
Yeah.
Like, the more I hear people say the words like the 3 letters CNS, the less I think they know about it. And I think I know nothing about it. And I try to base my entire system and program.
Yeah, dude. It's so funny. It's so true. I've been saying that like every time I say it, I'm kind of just like, I'm getting to the point now where I'm like, Man, I use it so often because it's like something I'm like, what do I actually know about that thing? Like, you know what I mean? I'm like, cause it's like, it makes sense. Like it's been a part of almost like everything I've studied. Like we work with the CNS. It's like, wow, we're here. Right. But I'm like, man, you know what? I don't know. I don't know if I know. And the other thing to mention, and I'll let you continue, but it's just the flip side too, is when like I've gotten comfortable being like, I'm not sure. Let me do some digging on this and I'll get back to you. Obviously, I work in the remote setting now, so it's a little bit different. Whereas like on the spot, in the weight room or whatever, an athlete's going to want an answer right away. And of course, there's something that you could come with. There's probably some sort of modification that can be made. And obviously, that's kind of why we get compensated, right? Is like the skill and efficiency to which we can make some of those decisions. But I think there are some like. Yeah, but I think there's some like larger things that it's like, it's okay to be like, you know what, let me do some digging and I'm going to get back to you for like some of the ones who were like curious and just asking you questions in your office.
And those are the best conversations to have because they care about the process. It's like, why are we doing, multi-directional tempos? It's like, well, we can train the aerobic system like linearly, but the game's not really played linearly. So we accumulate all this low CNS volume, decelerating and working on our ability to cut in, 8 vectors in order to enhance the tissue resiliency around it. Or we can do, linear tempos, like both have their time and place. But as we get closer to the season, I think that we can be a little more specific with our demands. And then kids are like, oh, okay. Like, and then like, or be like, man, I saw this on Instagram. Why are we doing this? And then you drop some knowledge on, they're like, all right. Like, then it's like, oh, okay. He's like thought about it. Or, somebody will be like, some days like, yo, we have an open set because I don't know how this is going to look after what we did last week. So our last 3 sets are open. You feel good, let it rip. You don't, chill out at your, 80% or whatever we ended up deciding to end on. So I think that's something later in your career that you become better at is, having that ability to say, hey, I'm not sure, or hey, like, let's have a genuine look at this. And I think when you're genuine about it, the kids and athletes realize that and know that you have the best interest at heart through the rapport and trust process. That enhances the product so much more, in my opinion.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be nice if all the athletes you work with just follow the same people that you follow on Instagram? Then you're just like, everybody. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. But well, kind of getting back into Sprintember, and then we'll wrap up here in a little bit. But I do want to kind of get back into some of the major positives and the major impact, because obviously you seem like you're like, all right, listen, I just wanted to put out a good product, help some people out. It's not like you're charging or anything like that. You just were like, I'm just going to make a free program or whatever. COVID and, like you said, boredom kind of, they were the creator of a lot of things, right? Good and bad, right? But it's just like, yeah, what's so if you could kind of talk us through like the number one, like most positive thing you think you've taken and sort of created from Sprintember, and not that there would be any negatives, but was there any sort of like negative feedback or any sort of obstacles that you came across when you were going through the process of creating the programs?
I think no negative in the process of creating it besides, additional work, but I think it's for the right cause. Some of the negatives, I think people think that people who myself or people who like sprinting don't think strength's important. They're like, oh, if they don't live like, do we have guys who bench 400? Like, I just don't think it's that important comparatively for certain sports and transfer. Like, we like lifting, our guys like training hard. It's not, I just think that speed is so much more of an art form to coach. Like, if you can coach squat, big toe, heel, corkscrew your feet, drive your knees out, keep your chest up, great. Like, it's awesome. And then you cue those like 6 things and people will get 90% efficiency at it half the time. Obviously, like, the right ankle, the left knee, like whatever you're looking at and changing that's awesome. But like changing somebody's sprint mechanics or changing their speed from point A to point B, or being able to, like you talked about, the global training load concepts on the field. Like, I think that's so much more valuable. So I think the negative would be the perceived thought of not having this be a piece of the holistic training model, right? We hours and people talk about, oh, I care about speed, but they're doing 2.5 hours of conditioning, 30 minutes of speed and 6 hours of lifting. And it's like, well, you're not putting your money where your mouth is. You're not putting your time where your mouth is. So the perceived thought of not this being one factor in a holistic training model would be the negative, I suppose. And the positive, just enhancing the awareness that this should be highlighted more frequently. And like I said before, maybe it was because I was following the wrong people, but a lot of guys at a lot of programs, in my opinion, are highlighting bench, squat, deadlift, and not enough field work, which is why athletes get paid, right? Athletes get paid on Sundays for us because their performance in the field work. Some of the best athletes I've ever had were totally average in the weight room. There's a number of dudes that are playing on Sundays right now that were just like,
Yeah.
maybe I did more harm than good in the weight room for him. Who knows, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's like you said before, like because of or in spite of, right? I think if everybody just starts to ask themselves that question a little bit more often, we might be, moving in the right direction. But I think that's awesome. I think it's awesome what you've done, and I think when it comes down to it, it's funny because I thought the initial negative would be like a lot of dudes who were just like straight up like weight room meatheads would just be like, dude, what are you trying to do? Like, what is this nonsense or whatever? Stop trying to like push out or push up against some of the weight room templates or the weight room programs that have caught fire or whatever. And I think they're all great. Like anything that just like gets a bunch of people together talking and just kind of like having some fun and be a part of something is great. So I think it just happens to be a little bit more fun that it's something that's related to sprinting. Obviously, it's something I think as coaches we there's a certain group of people who really start to like I said, at some point in your career you kind of just gravitate towards that, and it's like, oh, sprinting, super important. I want to know everything there's about sprinting. And it's like, oh, different variations of sprinting, and then there's like Franz Bosch, and then we're not going to go that route, but like
No,
what I mean?
don't.
We're not going there. I promise you, we're not going there because I got some family here. We got to go eat at some point tonight. But yeah, so no, it's all good stuff. But I do appreciate it. And I guess my last question to you, Mike, would be, given what I just kind of described about the industry, where do you think, what is your like kind of take on the current pulse of strength and conditioning, and where do you think we need to go in order to continue to establish ourselves in a positive light?
Yeah, I think some people get like upset, like you kind of mentioned, like people will be like, oh, why are you pushing up against the weight room? It's like, dude, we're like, look around the room, man. Like a lot of us are former athletes. A lot of us like lifting. Like it's kind of reality, right? So I don't get upset when people are like that, but like you said, people want to be thought of in a positive light, and I think that's first off, acting like that and conducting yourself in a manner like that. Like I think too frequently we see guys who want to be respected, want to be well paid, but then they act a certain way. And it's like, dude, you can't give me A and then ask for B. Like you have to make it match. And it's tougher. We can't dress for the job we want. Like we're wearing t-shirts, we're wearing a backwards hat, like it's the reality of our profession. Like we look unprofessional at times, right? Our appearance, if we are 300 pounds and we're trying to teach somebody plyometrics or speed training, like it's probably not going to be great. Like you have to be able to demo some stuff, and that's some stuff that people disagree on. Like, oh, you don't have to demo everything. You don't have to do this. Like I do believe that you should be competent explaining or demonstrating to some degree. My triple broad jump ain't great by any means. Trust me on that. But no, I think the industry is in good hands. I think the more young strength coaches I talk to, there's a ton of them out there. They're just like our athletes. They're so much smarter. Like when I was 22, I knew nothing. I still know nothing, but I'm like, this 23-year-old smarter than me, man. He's read like all these books. He's done these internships. I was like, I was just a college athlete who needed a job in the summer. I just needed a job. And I was like, oh, I like the weight room. Let me hang out in there. And then I ended up coaching for 12 hours a day with all these different athletes and learning under my strength coach, who I find out like 20 years later is like a legend, right? Like when I'm calling him all the time, like, oh, wow. Like I was actually really fortunate, looking back, I probably should have paid more attention. But I think that the profession is in good young hands. And I think it's important for the people who are in positions to potentially be role models, act a certain way and conduct themselves, and then ultimately give back to those individuals.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I was gonna say, like when I was young, I was that dude who was just like the early 20s dude who's just like in the back of the fitness 4000, just trying to max out on bench every single day, right? Like buried, like just stapled under a bar, like yo, help me, bro. Like, can you help me get this weight out?
If you didn't have one of those super thin bars, like with the really like that wouldn't fit on an Olympic bar, on a super thin like Body by Jake bars, and
100.
Get bruising across your chest. Like it's just kind of how a lot of people got started. Right?
It's a rite of passage. But I do agree. I think like the mistakes that I made younger, or even like towards like the middle parts of like my 20s and late 20s, guys are making at a younger age and learning from them younger, and it's just a great evolution. I agree. I think the industry itself is really evolving and going in the right direction. I agree. So last thing, if you just kind of want to tell everybody, where they can find you, and any final words, obviously, like anything you want to mention about Sprintember, anything else that you want to kind of give to the people. Now's your chance. You got the floor, Mike.
Nah, Coach, I really appreciate you having me on. I think what you're doing is awesome. I think the product you're putting out is great. I'm on Instagram. I try and, post during Sprintember sometimes. That's about it. But that's at Tucker Mike 43. Really open to connecting with anyone and everyone. I'm always trying to learn, and, pick and understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, just for my knowledge. And so I can maybe steal something and bring it back to my guys. And I try and give back and try and give as much insight into our program as possible, because people have helped me along the way, right? Like I wouldn't be even close to where I am without Jeff Oliver at Holy Cross, without other guys at other places, and some of those guys at other places, and, show you how not to do things and how you don't want to be like. So I think that's important too. But like I said, I think the Sprintember in itself is hopefully bigger, better, and faster year 3. I'm fighting the evolutionary process of getting older. But hopefully we can provide a good product. Hopefully we can, get some coaches faster, and hopefully educate some coaches and help get their athletes faster. That's the ultimate goal. So
yeah, no, absolutely. I'm pumped, because it's funny. Like I remember like early spring, I'm like, oh man, when it starts getting warmer out, I was like telling my brother, I'm like, dude, we're going to be sprinting every day. And it's like, I realized like midsummer, I'm like, damn, man, all I've been doing is just like lifting and like doing jujitsu. I was like, I have no sprinting at all. And I'm like, it's about to be in August, by the time this thing comes out. I'm like, you know what? So yeah, I'm pumped, and it'll give me something that's like, all right, I'm going to be held accountable to this work that's going to take place in September. So.
So the prep should be now, right? Like,
yeah.
Well, that's why I put out a beginner program, because I'm like, a lot of coaches are probably just doing like jujitsu and lifting, and it's like, because they'll like revert back to what they feel good with, and then like they're like, oh shit, like August 29th, they're like, do I have cleats, or like should I go out on a track? Like, and then they pull a hammy. So I try to do a beginner and an advanced program.
That's a great addition to the program. That's an awesome addition, because honestly, like I think my like sprint work, I'll be like, I've been doing sprints, man. It'll just be like those 2 5-yard sprints I do at the end of my warm-up before I go squat. It's like, you're not sprinting, buddy.
With knee sleeves on. Oh
yeah. 100%, dude. 100%.
I feel personally attacked right now.
Yeah, no, it's not a personal attack. It's just accurate. You're just spitting facts. This is exactly what I do. I actually have reverted away from wearing knee sleeves. I'm moving up in the world. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
Good stuff.
Or down, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah. It depends on who you're asking. Right? Some people are like, oh man, you're going in the wrong direction. I'm like, I'm barefoot, and I basically squat with nothing except just some shorts on. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
There you go.
But thanks again, man. This is awesome. I really appreciate it, Mike. Listeners, obviously, we thank you guys as always. We wouldn't have a podcast without you. And Mike, we'll catch you soon, man.
Coach, thanks for everything. Appreciate it.
All right, have a good one.